Eternal Dusk, Enmi. Written by Rob Stafford. Read by Rachel Wallace. Art by Rebekah Stafford. The jagged blue moon Iothea ascended the ever-dusk sky of Twy. Towering shadows of fungal trees swallowed up the lone inn, bordering an ancient road. Lanterns swayed as the wooden sign reading, "The Dusty Guardian," creaked in the gentle breeze. Inside, a middle-aged woman ground a white powder with her mortar and pestle. Clinking at the grinder on the side of the bowl, she added another chunk into the container, as a pounding rang out at the entryway. Before she could rise from her stool behind the bar, there was a loud thud as the door flung open. The green fire in the hearth swelled from the influx of air as a large man lumbered into the building.
"Room,"
he grunted as he swayed forward. The hilt of his longsword clanked off his belt clasp with each step. Scars littered his face as if he was a scratching pole for a manic rodent. The iron hinges cried out as the latch shut the door behind him. She recognized the newcomer from a posse that had rested here over a month ago, but could not put a name to his shredded profile. "I have a spacious room with fresh linen for 3 silver. If you're only wanting a spot by the hearth, it'll just be 2 copper. The stranger reached to his side, passed his sword, and untied a soiled purse. He muttered to himself as he counted out 3 coins and set them on the bar. The light from the flames flickered off of his glazed eyes. "Let me show you to your room, sir?" the innkeeper asked. "Food?" "I have some spoiled mutton and glowdrop for 5 copper.
"Name?"
the man said, almost as a growl. "Enmi, if it pleases you." She gave a quick curtsy in her gray wool dress. The newcomer muttered again before he dropped 5 more coins in her palm. The size of his hands reminded Enmi of when she would hold her dad's hand as a child. She brushed her long silver hair out of her face and put the coins in her satchel before forcing a smile. "I'll have that food right out for you," she said, as she turned and walked into the back room. As soon as the door latched behind her, Enmi grabbed the bronze knife she kept on the closest shelf. Removing a lantern from the wall and opening the hood, a luminescent mushroom cut through the darkness. Each step groaned as she descended into the cellar. Striding past the recently dressed corpses that hung from hooks in the ceiling, Enmi set her light down on a table and began carving a leg of mutton. Even without eyes, she could feel the suspended husks staring accusingly at her while she carried out her bloody work. Once done, she returned to the main room, skewering the chunk of meat and set it to roast over the fire. At a table in the corner recesses of the inn, the man's face lit up from a cigarette, the smoke hanging above him like morning dew. Removing a clean tankard from a shelf behind the bar, she took a deep breath. She filled the cup until the bioluminescent liquid threatened to spill over. Offering a small bow, she offered the tankard to the stranger. His eyes were transfixed in a world beyond her own as another puff of smoke rose ever onward. Enmi set the brew on the table in front of him and nearly made it to the hearth before having to breathe in the earthy musk of the beer. 2 decades of serving the grog hadn't been enough to temper how her stomach retched from the concoction. Flames sizzled as fat dripped from the half-browned meat. After rotating the spit, she returned to her work at the bar, never leaving her guest unwatched for more than a few breaths. Time passed to the sound of a crackling flame, tapping and grinding as stone on stone. The man only picked at his food after it had been set in front of him. Finally, the patron lifted the flagon and drank long and hard. 2 rivers of glistening green poured over the iron rim, flowing from the sides of his mouth before conjoining into a waterfall at his chin and spilling onto the floorboards. Coughing, cup to lips, he dotted the wall and table in flecks of spittle and beer before falling limp to the table. Groping for the ever-chilled bronze knife, Enmi nicked her finger on the blade as she drew it from the satchel. Gently, she sat the bag on the bar, grabbed the half-full pestle, and approached the motionless body. The blood from her finger froze to her skin as the twine needled at the open cut. Enmi steeled herself for the smell of the glowdrop, knowing that would be the second worst thing that befell her this night. Every floorboard she slinked over cried out in betrayal of her silent purpose. The intention of not wanting to be snuck up on was a double-sided sword. Pulsating green firelight gave the lifeless form a sense of undeath with his now ghost-white skin. Astride away, Enmi set down her pestle and approached with the knife in her right hand and raised a warding left before her. The sleeve of her dress fell back towards her shoulder, revealing deep scars and suture marks etched down her arm. A gurgling sound cut through the atmosphere as the body twitched. The skin around the stranger's face bubbled as boiling water on a stove. Along its steaming water of flesh, lines moved like the back of eels cresting the surface before returning underneath. "Blight merged!" Enmi hissed as she jumped backwards. She had recognized the signs, but every time prayed to the moons she was mistaken. The body curved unnaturally as it rose from its chair. Claws of fungal branches writhed out of the open cuts on the man's face and every orifice it could find. His eyes bulged as the twigs twisted underneath the skin till one came loose with a and dangled from its optic nerve, constricted by coiled wood. The man tried to speak, but all that came from his lungs was an airy moan. Enmi muttered an incantation and slid the tip of the blade a finger's length down her arm. Quickly, she grabbed a pinch of bone powder in the bowl and soaked up the red liquid. The newly formed paste warmed her skin and closed the cut, but before it finished, Enmi flung it at her attacker, striking the blight merged on the forehead. A drop of color returned to the skin it touched and fanned outwards, but fungal tentacles quickly rushed out of their cuts to wipe away the healing balm. Steaming tendrils burned away as the goo fell to the ground, and paleness swallowed restored skin tones. It lunged at Enmi. Not fully aware of her surroundings, Enmi kicked over the bowl of bone powder as she evaded the attack. She cursed under her breath at her foolishness. Keeping her eyes on her enemy, she reached down and grabbed the tankard that had fallen over. Every reach the monster took to grab her was met with a bash from the iron cup as Enmi pivoted so her back was to the fire. She would bide her time for the perfect opportunity. Together, they danced in combat, back and forth, the only tempo being the bludgeoning of iron on wood-hardened skin. Finally, the blight merge went to grapple Enmi. Getting her wish, she moved to the side and pushed the abomination towards the fire. The closest animated twigs recoiled against their host's skin, trying to escape as it stumbled towards the inferno. But a blight merge is not so easily killed. There was a continuous snap as twigs broke every bone in the poor man's body. With no support, the corpse instantly dropped and slid towards the fire. The husks slammed into the stone base, knocking over cooking tools in a clamor. The tip of the spit landed right between the man's shoulder blades. More fungal tendrils exploded from the fresh wound. The body stood up, moving, looking like a gelatin puppet. There was a sound of ripping and tearing as a point threatened to burst from inside the blight merch's chest. Enmi grabbed the nearest table and flung it towards the monster as the skewer pushed outward from its chest and a flaccid hand moved to wield the metal poker. Vines moved to cover up the hole in the blight merch's chest. Enmi knew the stranger was beyond even the strongest healer's magic. Only one option remained. Enmi slid towards the overturned bowl as branches sprung outwards, running up and down the man's body like veins. A newly structured hand examined the poker like a veteran holding their sword and remembering the blood price of survival. Splinters stabbed into Enmi's palms as she did her best to pile the scattered bone dust together. Whatever she found would have to do. The blight merge pushed the flip table out of the way with ease and drew the sheathed sword with its free hand. Enmi took in a deep breath as she prepared her next spell. The chill from the blade kissed her bone as she plunged it deep into her arm and pulled downward. The mixture of adrenaline and shock numbed the pain momentarily, but she knew it was a fleeting bandage. Enmi held her elbow above the ground bones as a stream of blood carved out a reservoir in its powder center. Her skin turned the color of the creature she swore to destroy. Dropping the knife, she put her fingers into the coagulated paste. Out of the mixture, she pulled forth a long, razor-sharp needle made of blood, freely given, and bone, finely riven. The weapon appeared assembled by bone shards like shattered pottery, with flowing red glue holding together the jagged and mismatched pieces. What little of the paste remained, Enmi applied to her throbbing cut, granting another temporary cure. Her left hand numb and shaking, she stood to meet her approaching doom. The poker thrust forward as a crossbody slash from the sword yearned to remove Enmi's head from her shoulders. A well-timed duck left nothing but falling hair to meet the blade. As if they were long-lost lovers, she pushed her body tight against the blight merge. Crimson blood from her arms evaporated as it smeared on the corrupted skin. Enmi, using all her strength, dug the needle into the chest of the stranger. Heavy breathing, accompanied with the dripping of blood, overlaid the welcoming crackle of the fire. Beginning at the heart, every tendril of fungal wood turned white until the whole body was reminiscent of a marble statue with slashes of undead flesh. A sliver of the needle stuck out of blight-merged chest, all red drained from the weapon. Enmi pulled herself from the body and sauntered behind the counter. Removing a small box from the back of the bar, she took out a hooked needle and thread. She tied the thread around the metal before tightening a belt around her arm. Grimacing, the metal pierced her flesh. Finishing her bloody sewing, she went and grabbed a hammer and mallet from the back room. The chisel chimed along the bone, sending bone dust into Enmi's face. Breaking off a chunk of bone, she picked up her pestle and sat at the table. Once ground to a fine powder, Enmi produced a vial of blood from her kit and applied a heal salve to her fresh cut. She would survive, but be miserable for a tide, if not longer. Before moving the corpse, she sat down on a chair by the overturned table and ate pieces of dried meat and drank 2 tankards of water. Using a dolly, she transported the bone man to the top of the cellar stairs and locked the door to the back room along with the front door. Making her way to her room, she fell asleep as quickly as she flopped on the feather mattress. No dreams visited her for many phases. It took glows of chiseling to get the dead blight merged to a weight she could comfortably waddle down the stairs. Whenever she needed a break from the labor of shaving off chunks of bone, Enmi could be found scrubbing the wood in the inn. Once in the cellar, Enmi wheeled the body by the other hanging blight-merged corpses that she had already harvested all the bones and the little blood that remained. Even with her bloodletting magic, it took a tide for her arm to fully heal. Thankfully, the moons were graceful, and only a handful of travelers took up lodging. They brought her stories of territorial skirmishes in the Great Scars, and the spine fields swallowing villages whole. Enmi nodded respectfully at their conversations, taking notes of what was drunkenly said once they retired for the night. Glows passed since her last guest. Sol'Kar blazed in the dusk sky, a small red light shining across the vast celestial sea. As Enmi sealed a vial of blood and placed it in her emergency box, there was a pounding at the door. In stumbled a woman, a multitude of daggers strapped to her figure. Amongst the scratched-up face were glazed-over eyes. "Room," she slurred out of a mutilated mouth. Enmi bent down and lifted a bowl filled with bone powder to the counter before saying, "I have a spacious room with fresh linen for 3 silver. If you only want a spot by the hearth, it will be 2 copper.
This has been an Eclipse fiction production. If you made it this far, please give us a like and let us know which part was your favorite in the comments below. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted for when our next story drops. We at Eclipse Fiction take pride in bringing you a human-made experience. Thank you for your time.